I got to play Battlefield 2042 at a behind-the-scenes closed-door event, and I've already got a video up on Battlefield Portal and how utterly mind-blowing it is and how much fun I had with that mode on the channel, and there'll be plenty more 2042 content, so stay tuned for that. But today I wanted to give you guys my full raw impressions of 2042, and we're going to be talking about everything from all-out warfare, the maps, the modes, specialists, Battlefield Portal, and Hazard Zone. And I'll be honest with you, it's a super mixed bag. Battlefield 2042 is a lot of fun, but it also needs a lot of work. If I were to describe 2042 as an analogy, it would be that it's almost like there's this incredible frame for the most beautiful painting in the world to be put inside. But there's kind of half a painting in there and not the full painting. Battlefield 2042 as a whole feels that it has a lot of great things going for it, and then a lot of confusing things going for it, and some things that just downright don't make sense. And each of the separate three experiences, All-Out Warfare, Hazard Zone, and Battlefield Portal, are all entirely different feelings of the same game, and some of them are way better than their other counterparts. And that's why I say that this is a mixed bag. Now before I go ahead, because there is some positives and some negatives to this, I don't want people to feel bummed out, because this game has a lot of promise, and even in places where there are some things that are wrong, there are things that can very easily remedy that, or things and changes that I can see happening that will make it better. And another thing I want to say is that I played this in a closed environment with press and content creators, so some things don't always work as intended. For example, sometimes when we were playing Hazard Zone, I didn't get a full server of full players because matchmaking wasn't working correctly, because we're playing in a closed environment and there aren't thousands of other players to queue up with, and things can get a little bit weird there, and it might not necessarily reflect the full experience. But with that said, let's talk about it. Before we get on to the entire content of All-Out Warfare, Hazard Zone, and Portal, I want to touch on performance. Performance in 2042 needs to be better. But don't worry, it isn't the fault of your graphics card, it's all CPU related, and definitely server related as well. Battlefield 2042 puts 128 players in confined spaces, and at times it's very obvious that the game is hammering your CPU in a way that even my 5950X, a 16-core, 32-thread, arguably one of the best CPUs on the market, which I actually have overclocked, was dipping in places, and the frames would be really great and then really bad, really great and then really bad. But one thing that Battlefield 2042 does have in its favor is that even on the lowest settings, this game looks incredible. You can be playing on low and you really wouldn't notice the difference. And the console experiences will be 4K 60 FPS, which is great for the guys on console. But performance was very hit and miss, and I think that this will improve with time, but there are definitely some optimizations that need to be made. So if you're running on a weaker system, you might want to wait for a little while. Slightly even more related to performance, bugs. And I know that people talk about bugs and the game being broken and all that kind of thing all the time, and for the 3 days that I played this game, I had pretty much no bugs, like no serious glitches or bugs that I noticed. There was one issue where players in the distance, sometimes their animations weren't rendering incorrectly and it was just a static object moving. But other than that, I had like one GPU related crash, but I tabbed out a couple of times so I can see why that can happen. And I didn't notice any major bugs or issues with the game, which for 3 days or 15 hours worth of footage, that's pretty damn good. Let's talk about All-Out Warfare, and I want to talk about the maps, the modes, the weapons and customization, the vehicles, all of that kind of stuff. And let's start off with the actual maps. Now the maps were fantastic. Honestly, I think that these maps are the best collection of maps that Battlefield has ever launched with. They all have unique experiences, the different objectives and points of interest feel very well laid out and interesting. But what I will say is they sometimes lack a little bit of flow. People moving from objective to objective isn't as cohesive as it was in previous games because they're so much larger. And I think it's going to take some time for that flow to appear. And I think, generally speaking, as much as I love the maps, they definitely worked a lot better on Conquest than they did on Breakthrough. I personally think Breakthrough was a little too chaotic. I think there was too much going on at one place at one time. And honestly, I think Breakthrough should be split between 3 objectives per sector rather than 2, and in certain cases it was 3, but there just needs to be more width, more variety here, because Breakthrough just felt very, very messy. Conquest was a bit more of a relaxed experience, and you had time to consider your engagements and gunfights, and it seemed to flow okay, but Breakthrough just didn't seem to work for me. It felt very frustrating at times, and it felt like the game mode was just pure chaos, carnage, death, and not many people revive you or heal you or give you ammo because of the specialist system, which we'll talk about later, and it just doesn't feel as good as past iterations of Breakthrough or past iterations of these mass objective modes with lots of people fighting over these spaces. So maps, I'm honestly going to give a solid 8.5 out of 10, maybe even a 9. They feel really great, each of them offers something completely different, and the built-up areas and maneuverability that some of them offer is really great. One of my favorite parts was Discarded, where there is rows of cranes above the major ship in the middle of Discarded, and you can actually like grapple between these things, and it creates these really fun dynamic moments that we haven't seen in Battlefield maps for a while, and I think it looked really, really good. Modes, however, for me, were more of a 6 out of 10. Conquest feels pretty good and is a relaxed experience, but Breakthrough, maybe if it was on a few more maps, or if I tried it on a few more maps, I would have warmed up to it a bit, but I just didn't really like it. Let's talk about Specialists, the elephant in the room. Specialists are still a bad decision, and to be honest with you, I think it's a terrible decision for the franchise, and playing Battlefield Portal even more reaffirmed to me that Specialists were a bad idea. It doesn't offer any kind of team play, some of the Specialists are cool and some of them are just downright useless, and it feels as though very early on these Specialists have lost their taste, and it's a stale factor in 2042. And I can very much see myself playing the 2042 maps and modes, but with Battlefield 3 classes in Battlefield Portal. But that isn't something I should have to do. Even in Breakthrough, where people were rushing the same objective, it felt like I was playing Call of Duty Ground War as opposed to a Battlefield title. And it just didn't feel like a team play experience, it didn't feel like a rock, paper, scissors experience, it didn't feel like the kind of Battlefield experience I want. And I just didn't like it. Specialists sucked, really. I mean, you know, some of them have abilities which are great, but kind of frustrate gameplay, and some of them are just awful. Take, for example, Jisoo. Her ability isn't as OP as I thought it was going to be, even though it is effectively a wall hack. But what's more annoying about it is that if you're on the other team, you constantly have this notification on your screen that you've been scanned, you've been scanned, you've been scanned, you've been scanned. And it's jarring. It creates a very, very jarring experience. Specialists were a bad idea, and actually during the presentation and the event that we had, DICE actually went on to explain that they felt the Specialists were a good idea, and that they felt that the limited number of Specialists in the beta meant that people's experiences were skewed, and perhaps their ideas and opinions would change when they got to see all of the Specialists. And that's just not the case at all. Like, Specialists are just conceptually a bad idea for Battlefield. They objectively didn't help team play or make the game a fun or team play based experience. And I just don't think they work in Battlefield. I don't think they should be in Battlefield, and I think they need a full overhaul in the next couple of months. The best example I can give you is that I ended up playing with Irish a lot, because Irish has plates by default, which is an extra 20% in TTK, but he has mobile cover, which is really helpful on some of the larger and open scale maps. But there were some of them where I just flat out just didn't go anywhere near them. Navin, for example, completely pointless specialist. Some of them just generally, like Falk, didn't go anywhere near them. Feels completely pointless. May as well use the Angel guy who can call in loadout drops and also give you plates when he revives you. And some of them just have no interest in their general playstyle. Like, I don't really care about the Dozer specialist, because ballistic shields don't really work, really. They kind of are a gimmick, and everybody who's used a ballistic shield in Battlefield 4 knows that it falls apart very quickly. But even more begrudgingly, some of the specialist abilities are just downright wrong, like things that shouldn't be in the game. Sundance, for example, has a cluster grenade. Super overpowered, and even does damage to tanks, which I wasn't expecting. And the grenade, which is for an anti-vehicle grenade, can lock onto helicopters that are hundreds of meters away from you, forcing them to pop flares. I didn't want to be too much of a doomsayer early on, but all the videos I've made about specialists have proven to be correct. They're either really useful or completely useless. They're either really fun or super frustrating, and there's no in between. and there's no team play semblance at all within the base version of 2042. I don't think I was revived in the entire first day of 2042, but when we played Battlefield 3 Portal, I was revived more times than I've ever been revived. There's just a team play mechanic that's entirely missing in this game, and specialists are to blame, and I think conceptually it's a terrible idea. Now, I do think that this can be changed. Specialists can be adapted and manipulated so that each of them have one default team-based piece of equipment at all times. For example, Falk is a medic. Falk should always have the ability to revive and always have a healing item at all times. Anybody who's a support specialist should always have ammo. Anybody who's an engineer should always have a repair tool. These are things that can be chopped and changed that already exist in the game that can make Battlefield 2042 more of a team play experience. But specialists, honestly, 3 or 4 at best out of 10. A really bad decision for the franchise. I don't think they work, and although they offer some fun elements in some places, they kind of take the soul out of Battlefield, and it kind of feels more like Call of Duty Ground War than a Battlefield game. Next, let's talk about customization, weapons, and vehicles. And I've grouped all of these together because I felt that they were all equally incredibly underwhelming, and this is a place where Battlefield massively needs to improve. Customization felt somewhat lacking. Specialists in terms of what they offer visually makes no sense, and the microtransaction element of future battle passes offering skins feels like it actually compromises the game more than it helps it. And we'll talk about customization first and move on to weapons and vehicles after. Now, you get some skins that you unlock through progression with each specialist, and there will of course be some in season passes to come. And you'd think, yeah, that's pretty cool. And you can actually change the outfit and the headgear piece, as well as different takedown animations. So 3 different types of customization. You can kind of mix and match some of the uniform. The problem with all of that is that the uniforms sometimes have colors that shouldn't be in the game. I shouldn't be able to equip a black and red uniform if my teammates see me, they think I'm going to be a bad guy, or a yellow uniform or a blue uniform. These are options available to you, and it's all incredibly confusing. And whilst I will say that I had less issues identifying enemies due to the UI, it just doesn't make any sense. The customization should have just been a gritty, war-based experience, but instead we've got these sort of strange Apex-esque outfits that kind of feel like they've been forced into the game as a form of MTX. But the mix and match component of it is kind of cool, and there are some operators like Irish who have really cool military looking skins that don't look too outlandish in the setting, and that's something I really liked. But I just wanted to see a little bit more, some more options. You know, games like World War III, for example, are offering severe levels of customization in terms of cosmetics, and I would have just liked to have seen a little bit more ante here. But you can of course also customize things like your no-pack card, different backgrounds, different taglines, different medals that you've achieved in the game from your progression, and that's a nice touch. I think it's better than the COD calling card system, and it allows you to flex some of your achievements in game. But then we get onto weapons and vehicles, and honestly this is the most disappointing part of 2042 for me alongside specialists. Now, I was expecting the plus system and the customization of weapons in 2042 to allow for different dynamics of gameplay. I was expecting the ability to turn an M5A3 assault rifle into sort of a stubby 9mm round M4 style SMG or an M5 style SMG. I was expecting to be able to turn an AK-12 into either an AK-74U or an RPK kind of setup. And none of that exists. None of that's in the game, and it very obviously could be in the game, but there's just no thought or depth to the customization system in the game. Yes, you can change your optics, but you fundamentally can't change the feel of the weapon. The weapon is what it is, and there are only 22 of them, so if you don't like any of those 22, you're stuck with what you've got. I want to be able to make the Scar H, for example, in the game feel like a short-range Scar H, a long-range Scar H, and have different trade-offs for having those different customization options. I want to be able to have an AK-12 turn into an RPK, or at least like an AK-74 kind of setup, with a drum mag, for example. And some of these options are kind of there, but, you know, for example, the barrels, you get like 5 compensators that do the same thing, 4 vertical recoil muzzle brakes that do the same thing, suppressors which do the same thing in some places, and grips and attachments that all again do similar or the same things. And there's no real depth to the customization of weapons. Visually, you can change them quite a lot. You can make them a short range kind of weapon or a long range kind of weapon just off of the optics, but you can't really change the feel of these guns, and I think that's what I was looking for, and I found that to be super disappointing. The same also applies for vehicles, and vehicles in some cases it's even worse, and this actually applies to some weapon customization too, because say for example the tank. There are 3 different types of tank shell, and I suppose some of them are slightly better than others in certain places. One of them is an anti-vehicle tank shell, one is sort of a sort of smart tank shell, which sort of maneuvers itself in mid-air to be more accurate, and the other one is a high explosive tank shell for infantry. And that's cool and all, but there's no other trade-offs. You choose either an LMG or a HMG, and the HMG is definitely better than the LMG, so you may as well take that. And the countermeasures are pretty much the same thing, but slightly different ever so slightly. I was expecting the ability to make a fast version of a tank, which had light shells that was focused on infantry, a heavy version of a tank that had more armor and, you know, did more damage to vehicles, but could suck with infantry and didn't have a machine gun, for example. And all of that just doesn't really exist, and it does exist a little bit on the helicopters and sometimes on the jets, but the settings are kind of lacking. And again, where I was expecting lots of depth and expecting 2042 to offer me something really tangible in terms of changing gameplay, it just wasn't really there. Now, it isn't all doom and gloom. Adding some more attachments, adding some more customization options, and just improving the ability to mess around with weapons and vehicles is definitely within the game. It wouldn't be too difficult either. They have lots of assets from Battlefield Portal that they can utilize, lots of different shell types, lots of different setups, attachments, equipments, things that have existed in Battlefield for a very long time to further diversify the gameplay. So it isn't all doom and gloom, but it just isn't there at the moment, and I was expecting it to be there, and when I realized that there were only 22 primaries with not a lot of variation, I found myself very quickly swallowing my words. I did say online, I'm happy with 22 guns so long as they're balanced and you can do things with them. But at the moment they're balanced, but you can't really do anything with them. And I guess that's what I was looking for. So if I were to rate All Out Warfare as an experience, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement here, and whilst I feel as though specialists are something that is conceptually wrong with the game, there are fixes to the vast majority of things that I've mentioned that can be implemented over the coming seasons, and things that will improve in time. I just wish that they were a little bit better and more thought out as they presently were. And the last thing I will say is that there are a lot of balancing issues that I can see arising from specialists and arising from some of the decisions that they've made with customization, so I really hope they get that sorted out quickly. Next is Hazard Zone, and I tried to not be too harsh on Hazard Zone because it was difficult to tell in a press environment what the game would really play like. And there are some things wrong with this mode that I do think can be very easily fixed, and things that can be changed to make it more interesting. But I don't really know if Hazard Zone is that great, and honestly, a Battle Royale would have objectively, in my opinion, just been better. So let's talk about Hazard Zone. And Hazard Zone is reliant on 2 things. Number 1, the core gameplay loop has to be interesting. And number 2, the currency system and risk-reward system and progression system has to be interesting as well. And the first and second one both aren't really all that interesting. The gameplay loop is somewhat interesting, but it isn't incredible and it isn't something that's going to blow you away. It's like somebody had the idea of creating Tarkov and Hunt Showdown, but didn't go the full distance. In Tarkov, the general environment of the game being super hardcore is what keeps you hooked. And in Hunt Showdown, the environmental threats are so incredibly painful and can lead to so many difficult situations that you have to choose between avoiding them, fighting them, and being prepared for PvP or PvE. And Battlefield doesn't really do any of those. The AI can sometimes be really aggressive and somewhat deadly, I guess, and somewhat challenging, but they aren't super advanced AI. And the actual objectives themselves, there are so many of them that people spread out so much that you don't really get many combat situations until the extractions. And I really wish that they would change that. There needs to be maybe 2 or 3 satellites at best, and there only needs to be those 2 extractions in the game. They need to make it more of a risk and less of a find some data drives very easily because there's like 10 of them on the map at any given point, and then maybe have a gunfight and then extract. I also felt like I was fighting a lot more AI than I was fighting actual players, because you do have, you know, actual AI on the ground protecting satellites. And I just don't really know. Like, I wish there were maybe 3 or 4 extra player squads in the game, because it felt like I didn't fight many of them. Although some of that could just be down to the nature of the press event and the creator event. But it does create some cool moments. There are moments of tension, moments of team play. There are moments where things kind of meld together in a really exciting way, and moments where even the specialist system kind of shines, like being Irish and throwing down 2 shields either side of the extraction point so you can defend your team and have a firing position. That kind of stuff was pretty cool, and I can see potential in Hazard Zone, but I can't shake the feeling that this just isn't fully realized yet. And the other thing really for me is that the time to kill doesn't make sense either, because Hazard Zone's time to kill is exactly identical as the multiplayer, which doesn't work in a mode which requires tension, team play, and the ability to down players. Armor plates should be default in this mode, so people have the ability to plate up, and generally increasing the TTK in the game would be a good idea. And the next part is the currency system. Now, if you suck at this, you're kind of ruined, and if you're great at it, it's great. But it's hard to tell because this was a press event and a creator event, and we won most of our games, or we extracted in pretty much all of our games except for one. So by the end of the sort of 5 to 6, 7 games I played, I had like 8,000 credits. And that's enough to buy everything that you needed for every single extraction. You don't have to buy attachments, because the attachments are whatever you have in your loadout. You only have to buy some tactical perks here and there. And if you extract and you make lots of credits, you very rarely find yourself low on credits. But the flip side of that, I guess, is that if you're somebody like the press, who naturally aren't as good as some of the YouTubers who play FPSs all day, some of them were really struggling to get credits. So this system is going to have to be tweaked and monitored in real time. But honestly, the credits don't really amount to anything. There's no inventory to manage. There's no thing to unlock, so to speak. You get some like calling cards or some no-pack cards if you reach a certain level of extraction streak, but there just isn't anything else. There's no cosmetics, there's no things to unlock, there's no specific things. It just adds to your normal character progression and how you level up in the game. Which, if that's something you care about, great, but for most people, in terms of Escape from Tarkov, managing your inventory was super cool about Tarkov, because it was this huge risk thing where you could lose really cool gear. And in Hunt Showdown, you leveled up your character, and if you didn't extract successfully, you lost everything that you'd leveled up on that character and all the perks and traits that you had got them. But it's a much more methodical system in Hunt Showdown, and Hunt Showdown is much less forgiving than Battlefield has in the moment in Hazard Zone. So again, tweaks are needed here, and I honestly didn't feel the need to replay Hazard Zone. I think it needs to be a longer game mode with longer TTK. It shouldn't be as quick as it is. It needs more players on the ground and less AI, and it needs to amount to something. If I reach 10,000 Dark Matter credits, or whatever they're calling it, I should be able to maybe get a cosmetic for the game from the store or something. There just needs to be more of a hook here, and I feel like that hook is missing at the minute. At the moment, I'd give Hazard Zone maybe a 6 out of 10. Close to All Out Warfare. It shined in places, but it also just massively stumbled and fell in other places. And honestly, a Battle Royale would work so well in Battlefield 2042. Please do it, just because Hazard Zone showed me that a BR would be really cool. So yeah, just do a BR, because everybody wanted a BR, and it's going to be a much better system, I feel, than Hazard Zone. So all of the new content in 2042, All Out Warfare and Hazard Zone, honestly felt a little bit lackluster. But then we get to the final kahuna, the big boy mode that I was looking forward to the most, and that is Battlefield Portal. And I've done a full video on Battlefield Portal, and I'll leave a link to it. But in summary, Battlefield Portal is a 10 out of 10. There is nothing wrong with Battlefield Portal. It's an incredible part of the franchise. I want it to be in every single Battlefield game in the future. And honestly, it feels like it carries 2042. It feels like it carries what 2042 is, and it seems like the team at Ripple Effect have created something that just feels better. It feels like a better experience than 2042, and allows you to craft 2042 into a better experience. I don't like specialists in the game, so when I get into the Portal editor, I'm going to get rid of specialists. I'm going to play with Battlefield 3 classes on Battlefield 2042 maps with 128 players, because the maps for All Out Warfare I thought were great. I'm not going to get too in depth here because I've already used a lot of time for this video, but Battlefield Portal is the best part of 2042, and I hope they never get rid of Portal. I hope it's in every single future Battlefield game. I hope it's a staple of the franchise, and I hope the team at Ripple Effect carry on doing Battlefield Portal for the next 10 years. I'll leave a link to the video, the full video on Battlefield Portal, so you guys can get a real understanding of why this mode, which is a full-on mode editor, a full-on remastered Battlefield experience, is so good, because it is. And yeah, that was the best part of 2042 for me. So should you get 2042? And is 2042 a bad game? And what would I give it? You should get 2042 and give it maybe a 7 out of 10 as a whole. And I don't think it's a bad game. I think 2042 has a lot of room to grow. I feel like there are places where the game needs more maturity, diversity, it needs better things, better systems. But I don't see those systems being too difficult to implement. And I don't think they've gotten too much of the game wrong, like maps, for example, or they haven't gotten, you know, the weapons themselves wrong. Some of them just need a little extra push, a little bit more interest, and they already have a lot of the assets and flexibility in the engine to do those things. So that's about it for this video, and I think 2042 has a lot to offer in time. It just seemed like this game maybe needed 3 or 4 months extra in the oven to really be something special. But I'm sure the seasons of live content and live services, which by the way are all free, like all the maps, all the modes, all of the guns, all of the specialists, they don't cost any money, which is fantastic, can make this game better and continue to push it into exciting directions. But right now, it's kind of a mixed bag. But some people won't necessarily care about some of that mixed bag. Some of you might like specialists. Some of you might not worry too much about the gun and weapon customization or the tank customization because you kind of don't really care about that stuff. So it's kind of hard for me to judge for you what your personal experience will be like. But for me, a 6/7 out of 10 with room for improvement. But honestly, I'd buy 2042 just for Battlefield Portal alone. That's about it for this video today, folks. Leave a like, leave a sub, we're on the road to 100k, and I'll see you in the next one.